Are you stressed, burned out, not sure if you want to keep working in the toxic environment of keyboard warriors, vicious public attacks, and unpredictable council dynamics? Have you ever found yourself wondering, is there another way? Where else could I utilize my experience and skills without staying in government? If so, this is the episode for you. Local governments are facing a growing trend. Seasoned professionals are leaving the public sector for private sector consulting roles, driven by burnout, compensation gaps, and quality of life concerns. Not because they've given up on public service, but because they're finding new ways to serve it from the outside. It is a tough time to work in local government. Burnout is high, morale is often low, and for many, the rewards are no longer outweighing the personal cost. So what happens when experienced city managers, department heads, and public administrators step out of City Hall and into the private sector? Well, today we're joined by someone who's leading that conversation. Jacob Green, a former assistant city manager and now CEO of Jacob Green and Associates, a firm that hires former public sector leaders to help cities and counties solve big problems. We're talking about salaries, pensions, happiness, quality of life, and the very real questions people are asking themselves about whether to stay or go. This isn't about abandoning the mission. It's about redefining it. Welcome to Gov360, your full circle view on local government. Today's topic hits close to home for many in the profession: the growing exodus of public sector talent to private industry. We're in a moment of unprecedented challenges. Public attacks are rising, morale is often low, and for many in local government, the personal and professional costs are becoming too high. But what happens when they leave? Where do they go? What do they gain? And what do they give up? One of the people with a front row seat to this shift is today's guest, Jacob Green. Jacob is the founder and CEO of Jacob Green and Associates, a firm that helps public agencies across the country tackle complex challenges using teams of former local government professionals. Before launching his firm, Jacob served 18 years in various local government executive positions in police, fire, economic development, and finally as an assistant city manager in California, and has since built a network of consultants who've made the leap from public to private without leaving their passion for public service behind. He's also the author of the Amazon best-selling book, See Change Clearly, where he dives deeper into public sector change and life's transitions. Jacob, welcome to Gov360.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored and excited to be here and love this topic and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, it's an honor for us to have you here. You're a big name in the business, and been looking for an excuse to reach out and get to know you. So I'm really happy to have you here. Let's dive right in and talk about the trend. Why are so many people leaving local government today? Yeah,
that's the right question right now, and it's really interesting, Chris. As you know, this number is only increasing. 4 years ago when we started Jacob Green and Associates or JGA, I got calls sporadically, mostly all from retired annuitants, folks that were retiring and considering going over to the private sector. However, today that's changed. Today, first of all, the call volume is radically gone up. So every single week I have anywhere from 5 to 10 conversations from inbound calls of folks that are retiring or soon to be retired. But now what I'm seeing is a lot of mid-career calls, a lot of folks that are in the pension system. They've been in maybe 10 years, 15 years, even 20 years, and they're considering departing and coming over to the private sector.
Wow. And
so I think, there are so many factors that are contributing to that increase, things that you've been exposed to that, you and your colleagues have seen. The industry is changing. The climate is changing. And so it's natural right now to look and see what else is out there and is the grass greener?
Yeah, no, it does seem that there is a higher degree of mental and emotional burnout going on in the profession right now. I think social media plays a big part of that. I mean, there's so much hostility and, just the politicization of public service. Really, we should be able to stay out of the politics, right, on the administration side. But that's increasingly, hard to do. I think, many in the community and on social media try to drag staff, especially, city managers, into the politics, which makes the profession less stable as well, because it becomes, a campaign issue for some candidates. And once they get in, they come in kind of on a platform of, I'm going to clean up City Hall and fire the city manager. And I think that is so much more common today than it once was. Issues that are becoming more challenging, budget limitations, lack of support. So it is definitely something I'm hearing more and more from others in the profession, and it's concerning.
Yeah, we spend a majority. Our team, we have over 30 team members in our company in JGA, and we spend a majority of our time with city managers, mayors, councils, police chiefs, fire chiefs, and other executives. And what is happening, at least in the city manager, city council world, that we see over and over, and again, working with councils and city managers just about every day somewhere throughout the country, is the role clarity, blurring of those lines. And that causes a lot of stress and a lack of understanding of the governance, the system and the structure that we work within, the roles and responsibilities. And that adds a lot of stress. We used to depend on the city managers and the executives for their professional expertise and their guidance. And we used to look to electeds for their understanding of the community and their connection with the community. And those lines are really getting blurred. And yes, as in general, there's a lot more tension, a lot more pressure on those top leadership, the executives that are leading our communities, our city managers and our top executives. And that creates a lot of mental and physical stress. The number of conversations that I'm having right now with top executives that are going through some sort of mental or physical health challenges and issues as a result of those changing environments and the scrutiny and the social media and the noise is really shocking and really sad. And for those of us, you and I, that are love this profession and love this industry of local government and public service, it's sad to see. But there is hope. There is other opportunity. There is options. And that's what I'm excited to explore today.
Yeah. And to your point, Jacob, something that I talk about a lot here on the podcast and just in talking with elected officials and staff, there's a trend where people are forgetting how this system is supposed to work, right? The council manager form of government. Yep. It has become the most popular form of government in the United States for good reason. Here in California, over 90% of the state's 483 cities implement the council manager form of government. And yet all too often it's forgotten how that system is supposed to work, right? Yeah. Forgotten or just disregarded, right?
Yeah.
And
why it came about, right? Why it came about as well, and why it's so important to maintain.
Right. You have a bit of a LinkedIn following, and about a month ago, you posted something that really caught my eye and was my inspiration for this episode, actually. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to read for our listeners what you posted, because it really hit home to me, and I'm going to read it verbatim here. You said, thinking of transitioning from public sector to private sector mid-career? I've been getting an unprecedented number of calls from mid-career public sector leaders contemplating a move into the private sector. This was unheard of just 5 years ago. While incredibly rewarding, the public sector climate is growing tougher every day. Declining civility, increased public scrutiny, and looming financial headwinds make the grass on the other side look especially green. I like what you did there, Mr. Green. That's
right. I have to use that. I did not change my name just to make that analogy.
Yeah. No. When I left local government mid-career, people thought I was having some kind of professional crisis. Why in the world would you leave the pension? Fair question, especially for someone like me who grew up as a local government superfan, glued to the local cable channel just to watch city council meetings. Yes, I have. Yeah, you need better hobbies, Jacob.
I know. I have no life.
But I quickly discovered the private sector offered a powerful new perch from which to make an even broader, meaningful impact. I've never regretted it. I loved working for a national local government consulting firm, and I can't believe I now lead a team of superstars at Jacob Green and Associates. And then you go on to give some pieces of advice that I'm sure we'll hit on here as we go along. But that was pretty powerful to me. And when I read that, I thought, man, this is, this speaks directly to what I'm hearing from so many people in the profession, right? And it is possible to pivot. and still use, all of your, experience and skills you've built throughout your career, and still satisfy that desire to serve the public, right?
Yeah, the transition that I made personally was not an easy one at all. However, it was one that happened as a result of some timing in my life and some work that I was doing, and trying to figure out how I could make impact. For me, I was an assistant city manager for 6 years, and that is the best job in government, by the way. Chris, you as a city manager, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. Your job, your role, I can't imagine being in your shoes and your colleagues' shoes. For me, it's an honor today to be able to work with city managers, but that number 2 job is a great job, and I loved it. And I thought, wow, I love working in my community. Is there a way where I could have broader impact and do those things that make that job so special, but do it with lots of different diverse environments, right? And do it with lots of different people. And so, things happened in my career journey that led me this opportunity to go to the private sector. And first, it was for a very large national consulting firm where I had an opportunity to be a managing director and ultimately a VP of innovation and oversee a couple portfolios, so I could learn how the private sector operates, which, by the way, everything I thought about the private sector did not meet reality. It was completely different. I thought it was this wonderful, magical world of unicorns and easiness and ping pong and cafeterias and all these kinds of wonderful things that I had seen and, dreamed of. It turns out to be a totally different reality. But working with that company was an amazing experience. And then got to 4 years ago, hang up my own shingle and try on my own. And so there's lots of different ways to explore that transition. Mm-hmm. One of the things that helped me decide, we have a mutual mentor, a mutual friend, Chris, that, as you know, in Greg Devereaux, who is a titan in the industry, former city manager of Fontana, of Ontario, former county CEO of San Bernardino County. He has 40 plus years in local government. He's on our team. He is known as someone who has transitioned and turned over and radically turned around many organizations and many communities.
Yeah.
And early in my career, when I was in the fire department, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. He had presented an opportunity for me, and he had recited at the top of his head Shakespeare. And the quote from Shakespeare in Julius Caesar was, and let me see if I can't recite it off the top of my head, I do have my cheat sheet, but there's a tide in the affairs of men which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life are bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current wherein it serves or lose our ventures. Mm. I think I get about a 95% on that, maybe.
That sounded good to me.
Emails correcting it. But it was really powerful. And it really told me that some of this is about listening to timing. Mm-hmm. Some of this is about listening to, what is the cycle that we're in as public servants? And where can we make the greatest impact? And what does that look like for us? Because when things come around and when the timing is right, at least for me, when I made the jump over, it was all about timing. And I don't have a single regret, not a single day. There are no unicorns over here. It is way more stressful than I ever imagined, but I love it. And I've learned so much about what goes into that transition. And I'm excited that maybe I can share some lessons today that might help some of your folks that are thinking about transitioning either after retirement or mid-career.
Let's talk about what some of those opportunities might be. So, I think about, when I think about what they might be, I think about some of the companies that I've contracted with, the cities that I've worked for have contracted with, maybe it's, for building and safety services or planning services or financial services. And there's some big companies in the field that come to mind. But maybe give us some examples of what some of those opportunities are.
Chris, thanks for this great question, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what the paths are, what the roads are, and the pros and cons. So, I look at it basically that an individual can choose to hang up their own shingle, start their own firm, always, typically starts as a small entity, and, either keeping it as a small lifestyle business or growing it into a larger company. But being an owner, an operator of a company, that's certainly one path. And that comes with all kinds of things we can explore. The other path is choosing what kind of firm you want to be an employee in or an independent contractor in. Now, it's tougher and tougher these days to actually be a 1099 or an independent contractor for a company, just because of the climate, especially in states like California with AB5 and other restrictions, make it a little bit more difficult. But you can join a small boutique, white glove type of firm or consulting organization, or a large company, large organization. And there's really pros and cons in any of those that you choose. I often tell folks that call me now, you may want to become an employee or a team member of an existing firm to learn about this space and this world, so you don't have to learn at your own expense.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to invest a lot if you're going to be an owner, a founder of a firm. You're going to have to invest a lot initially in getting that going.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
It really hit home to me, and I want to kind of drive that point home to people who are thinking about making this transition, because, I did the reverse switch, right? I was in the private sector for many years, most of my career really, and then made the switch over to the public sector, pretty much right after the Great Recession, where the private sector became a pretty rough place, and at least in the portion of the private sector that I was involved in, but. I ran a public affairs firm for about 13 years. A lot of the work we did was land use entitlement. But if I had just hung a shingle before having worked for a PR firm, I may have known a lot of the technical aspects of the consulting work itself, but the nuts and bolts, little things like, how do you put a proposal together, right? How do you know how to put your rate structure together, right? Just kind of the nuts and bolts business side of it. Boy, I would have been lost had I not worked within someone else's model that was successful. So I think it's an important point.
And Chris, you have such a, this is so exciting for me to have a conversation, first of all, with you for, who you are in the industry, but then also the background and the unique perspective that you have, because you have such an understanding of that private sector environment and the challenges that come with it. And yeah, I'm usually encouraging folks, hey, try to get on board with a company or an organization first to learn the environment in the space, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And the things that you have to do with your own shingle, as an owner, trying to figure out, what is a proposal and how do you cost something and how do you get the insurance and cyber insurance and what commercial auto insurance and professional liability and errors and omissions, never heard of that, and attorney fees and business licenses and, all those things have to be done and managed before you even get to make an impact on a client, on a single client. And so, yes, you're exactly right. Chris, learning a lot of that first is very, very helpful. And so there can be a lot of advantages to that. But there's differences, as you know well, between joining a boutique firm and joining a large corporate structure and environment. And exploring what that means. How specialized will you be versus how much freedom will you have? A lot of people think, I want to go to the private sector because I'll have tons of freedom and I'll be able to do, lots of different things. Well, that may or may not be the case.
Right.
And so, the piece of advice that I put in that post that I always talk to folks about is, what kind of values are you looking for in the company? What kind of environment are you looking for? And really spending some time researching that and trying to align, because just like our communities are so diverse, our cities, counties, and special districts are so diverse, so too is the private sector world. And doing your homework and doing your diligence before you take a job or take a role is important to make sure you have some alignment there.
It's funny you mentioned people going into the private sector to have more freedom, and my experience was, yes, maybe more freedom in that you don't have to clock in and clock out every day, right? You might have a little bit more freedom in when you do things, but not necessarily in the number of hours, right? I think the private sector can be much more intense in terms of the number of hours and how quickly things have to get done. A lot of pressure. But the first public affairs job I had was with Patrick O'Reilly Public Relations. I think still is the largest public relations firm in the Inland Empire in California.
Yes.
And I still remember my girlfriend at the time sleeping on the floor of my office one night because it was the only way we could see each other on Easter, because we had a proposal in response to an RFP due, like on Tuesday, and it was Sunday night, and we were nowhere close to being done. And man, I think I worked until 2 a.m. Getting that done. And while we work hard in the public sector, I've never seen quite the equivalent in the public sector.
I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. I have a slide. We do a whole onboarding orientation process for a new team member into JGA. And I have a slide, and it shows a government office and environment. And it says, typically, your work is kind of always there on the government side. And then I have another, picture on the screen showing the private sector. And that typically, your work can be done, And what I'm trying to convey about that is, in the private sector, you have to produce and make impact under deadline, and you have, financial responsibilities, or your performance will lead, or lack of performance will lead to you not having a role in the private sector.
Right.
In the public sector, there's lots of protections. And generally, I can say this after 18 years in the public sector, generally it's a little bit harder to be exited from the public sector, right? It's your performance. For example, how many agencies, Chris, in the public sector do performance evaluations and really lock in your employment and your safety and your security to those performance evaluations, and whether or not you're going to get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, whatever? Not many, right? In the private sector, your performance is going to dictate your financial abilities in the private sector, and whether or not you even have a continued role in the private sector, because those private companies may not be around if the teams aren't performing and contributing. So you're right. Those stresses are very, very different. And my dog and I have spent many, many hours sleeping in the office. Thankfully, the wife and kids haven't had to exactly do that too many times. But yeah, it's, when you're on deadline and you have to deliver and you have to perform, there's different stresses. There's stresses in the public sector and stresses in the private sector as well. It's just important to talk about those and know those before you sign the dotted line and grab this dreamy opportunity in the private sector.
Well, I guess it depends on which stresses you feel that you can tolerate best, right? Definitely not those same kind of stresses in the public sector for the most part, but definitely different stresses, right? Just the public scrutiny side of it, and putting yourself out there as a target, is something that not everyone is cut out for or happy with, and that's been a growing issue in the profession, and just kind of the public nature of it, having to disclose all of your income on the financial reporting forms, every year, and the limitations on gifts. A lot of times in the private sector, you've got a company card, and you're supposed to take clients out and spend lots of money, whining and dining. And public sector, we can't do that, right? That's not kosher. So a lot of interesting differences there, different stresses, but stresses on both sides.
And I think when people are thinking about the private sector, and they're thinking, oh gosh, it'll just be so much easier, and I may not have to work as hard, and it'll be a lot more flexible and great work-life balance and all these things. That can be the case in the private sector, but it's not always going to be the case in the private sector. And so going in, I always try to help people be aware of what they may be walking into, walking in right away and having KPIs and goals and performance measures and all these things that in the public sector, some of us didn't have, and some of us weren't used to.
Right. So let's talk about the differences in, salaries, benefits, pensions. If you're a career public sector employee, you may not be familiar at all with what that looks like in the private sector. Maybe give us some insight on if you're a city manager or an executive level person in local government, and you're thinking about making that switch over to the private sector. What are the biggest differences that you should expect to see?
Yeah, as you know, Chris, they're big.
Yeah.
I'm often not only facilitating performance evaluations for councils, for city managers, but also helping them negotiate contracts. And so I get a front row view on the packages and the values of the packages and the comprehensive benefits that are offered in the public sector, which are phenomenal and amazing. And I found that if folks that came from the private sector and went to the public sector were often a lot more grateful sometimes for the extensive benefits that are offered in the public sector. And they're hard to beat, they're hard to match. In terms of the secondary benefits, they're going to be hard. I think the private sector and public sector go through different cycles. It used to be you could go to the private sector to make more on your base salary, but the public sector offered really lucrative benefits in order to attract employees in. Today, I'm not sure. I think the answer is it really depends. I think in both the public sector and the private sector, you should be thinking and looking at things far beyond your base salary. Base salary in the public sector is important for your pension benefit and, how your pension can be calculated. In the private sector, there are other factors that you're probably going to spend a lot more time looking at versus, your base salary. Total comp is really important on the private sector because private sector can be very bonus based, right? So in the public sector, most of us aren't quite used to bonuses. I've seen some city manager contracts with some performance bonuses, but in the private sector, it can be very lucrative based on bonuses that are negotiated, and your base salary might be significantly lower, but your earning potential could be much higher. So you really have to look at the whole package, just like Chris, you look at as a city manager. You have to look at the entire package, all the different benefits. Generally, in my experience, the public sector just has so many different categories and additional options and things that you just won't see in private sector executive contracts that are put together. Really, in the private sector, it's going to be focused on bonus. What's the bonus structure? How does that look? How's it paid out? What am I responsible for? How much control do I have over my bonus in the private sector? In the public sector, it's a lot more given. There's a lot more dependable. Once you sign a contract, you know how much you're going to earn in the public sector. In the private sector, your earning potential is going to depend a lot on profitability in the company, revenues in the company, how the company's doing, how your performance is doing. There's a lot more variables. And of course, you don't have that pension at the end of the day.
Well, and I think that's the big one, right? I mean, that's I think for people who have been in the public sector for many years and you're building that pension, to me, that's probably the biggest potential roadblock when you're considering leaving the public sector and walking away from that pension. But, what have you seen, on the private sector side to kind of counter that? I mean, I think it used to be that pensions were also not uncommon in the private sector, but that's really changed. It's very rare now to see a private company that offers pension, right? So, does that typically made up through, base salary, or is that typically made up through 401k, or, what are you seeing companies do to entice people away from the public sector when it comes to, offsetting the loss of pension?
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of things on this, Chris. So one is, we have to look at the secondary benefits, so my team members, my employees, in my company, I'm trying to find out, what kind of flexibility do people need? What kind of schedules do they need? What kind of environment do they want? What's important to them? What's going to get them out of bed? What's going to get them excited? Because in our firm, we can customize and create those kinds of environments. There may not be a dollar value on that, right? But there's something additional that we can offer that in the public sector. Hey, if City Hall is operated this way and you're in a police department, you got to be set up this way. A lot of those conditions are not flexible. They're not changeable. You're going to be inheriting that. So we have a lot of different approaches in our company to help people feel like they're getting a benefit that they wouldn't have gotten in the public sector that they didn't receive. Yes, we have a matching 401k, and we offer that. It's not going to match the pension, right? How could you possibly match these pension programs that are out there? The private sector cannot compete with the pension. Right. But, in terms of the bonuses and the other financial incentives and the environment and the way in which we try to create our culture at JGA, that's what our people talk about. So, it's not for everybody. And there's going to be, really pros and cons. I'll share with you something for me that made the transition much easier. Like you mentioned, when I left the public sector as an assistant city manager, where I think a lot of folks thought I was going to be a city manager at some point, after I think that's the career trajectory that I was on. For me, it actually wasn't very hard because I had been through some significant challenges in my life, which I wrote about in the book, which showed me that life can be over just about any day. And for me, I wanted to be in a position where every day I was making positive impact and I was excited. I mean, I think you know me well enough, Chris, to know like I get out of bed every day. I am fired up. I love my job. I love what I do. I love my people. I love what we've created. I love our clients. I love what I get to do. And I have seen so many people hang in there too long just to get to that extra 3% of their pension. That, if I just stay, I'll get the 3% COLA, and that'll mean I'll get $500 extra every day. And you know what happens? They retire, and within 4 months, they have a stroke.
Right.
And I'm saying that, but I will be very careful on this podcast. I won't name folks and individuals, but without naming specifics, I have watched too many of my friends stay too long in the public sector to where not only did they not get able to enjoy their last 5 years, 10 years, but they also are now currently struggling in retirement with a life that they didn't necessarily envision or dream of because they stayed chasing the pension too long. And so when I get the phone calls, I'll ask about mental health. I'll ask about physical health. I helped a city manager in another state, so keeping it all confidential, about 5 months ago, transition out about 3 years earlier than this individual wanted to transition out because they couldn't physically be there any longer. The stress was tearing them up. And they're now doing bike rides. They're now doing the things that were on their list that they could never have done before, hiking and bike rides and grandkids time. And yes, are they making $500 less per month? They are. But are they exploring other ways to make some additional income without any pressure because their pension is covering some or a majority of their costs?
Right.
Yes. And, we have folks on our team that have left earlier than they anticipated, and they're very fulfilled and very happy and making more now because they can add this supplemental income to their pension, even if it's just 10 years in the system or whatever it might be. So I think it's very individually driven. Everybody has their own situations. I think many of your listeners are going to think I'm crazy and probably giving really bad advice to even consider leaving the pension. But I don't know, probably like you, Chris, I've been to funerals.
Yeah.
I've been to 53-year-old funerals that were waiting to get to 55, that were waiting to get to 57 or 62. And life happens and things happened. And, I didn't want to be in a position because of a couple of things that had happened earlier in my life where I learned the fragility of my life. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was regretting not being able to make positive impact in the industry that I love.
Yeah. I'm encouraging people who are listeners to this podcast, we're kind of forming a community, right? A kind of a support group of people, in local government, because it is such a difficult time to be a, local government professional. And so I encourage people to kind of be vulnerable and open. And I've been pretty open about some of the things that I've been going through, honestly, I'm in a good place now. And I'm six and a half years now into kind of my journey as a city manager, specifically 25 years of experience in and around local government. But, as a city manager, I'm about 6.5 years in. And for 4.5 of those years, I have been absolutely in love with the profession to the point that it's hard for me to imagine doing anything else. But, I'm in a very good place now. But, for a couple of years prior to where I am now, it was a very politically difficult place to be. And it made me start to question whether I could do this long term, right? Is this the right path long term? I got involved in the retirement system, CalPERS, later in life than most because of my history in the private sector. So I have about 10 years in the system. I have 4 years that have been just kind of sitting there from many years ago when I was on a city council, and 4 years on a city council, and those years stayed in the system. So I've got about 10 years in the system. I'm under PEPRA, which is the Pension Reform Act. So that formula is not as generous. So that means that to get the full benefits of the pension system, I'd really like to get to 30 years in the system. I'm 48 now, and so that means I've got another 20 years to go. And it really caused me to stop and think, can I do this for another 20 years, right? Yeah. Without just having a heart attack and killing over one day, right? Yeah. But I think so much has to do with the environment that you're in, and being back in a very good place, healthy place. I'm starting to feel like, oh yeah, no, I can do this. I forgot I'm in love with this career. I love this, right? Yes. But I certainly understand those who are just feeling beaten down, by it, and they just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, and like I said, Chris, it's I have many conversations every single week now. It wasn't always the case, but now it is. I mean, before it was people calling me, making sure I'm okay because I left the public sector, and now it's people saying, "How'd you do that?" And how do I do that? Because I can't do it anymore. Yeah. And it's not just city managers or top executives. We're every level. Every level of local government is under more scrutiny, more criticism, more public criticism with social media, et cetera. And it's really challenging. And it's sad to see really great people that are struggling, but there's lots of options and there's opportunities out there. Chris, it does remind me of another thing that I would throw out is often, when I'm speaking at conferences, I'll ask an audience, how many of you want to be a city manager? And like the whole room raises their hands. This is generally at conferences where folks are not city managers, maybe, and I'll ask that question. And, the room is majority, let's say 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40. And I'll be saying that's great. That's amazing. You may want to think about the wear and tear of the position and how you set yourself up for mental and physical health later. If you dive into that city manager position at 25, you have a lot of years and time that can be very challenging. And will you be able to have your personal financial situation such that you can say no to a council when you're confronted with things that body may want you to do, or an individual may want you to do? So I watch a lot of city managers that aren't in the financial position to say no, either because they took the position or the executive role too early, or because they just haven't made the preparations on the home front. So they end up saying yes to a lot of things that maybe they are compromising their values now because their financial situation depends on it. And so there's so many considerations. I know it's a little bit slightly off topic, but I think there's a lot of considerations as we look at our career trajectory and the positions that we take. When do we take them, and what do we explore, and how does the private sector fall into that? And what should we be thinking about? These are all important things as we try to make these big life decisions.
Yeah, no, you said something that I want to touch on. It's something I talk to people about who are considering city management as a career. Maybe they're an assistant city manager, deputy city manager, and they're thinking about trying to make that next step. And I, first of all, I ask them, why do you want to be a city manager? And I'm surprised at how often that actually stumps people.
Yes.
But the other question I ask is not a question so much as just something for them to think about. Be sure you're financially ready to be in that spot. Yeah. Because you cannot be effective leading from a place of fear.
That's right.
Right. And so, first of all, make sure your contract protects you. Right. Make sure that your severance is enough, that you're going to feel comfortable, that, gives you enough time to find the next landing spot. Right. Yeah. But also have enough money. It's always good, no matter what line of work you're in. They say you should have a certain number of months of your living expenses, set aside as an emergency fund, whether that's 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is. In city management, it's all the more important that you're able to sustain yourself, even if you have a good severance, because, you could have a council that tries to fire you for cause, in which case they don't pay your severance. And that's probably going to end up in a lawsuit. And you may end up being, successful in that lawsuit. But in the meantime, your bills aren't getting paid unless you've prepared. So I advise people who are thinking about stepping into that role, don't do it until you've got that money set aside, so that you have to be able to walk away if you need to walk away, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're going to end up not just stressed, but probably compromising your own ethics, and you don't want to put yourself in a position where you just can't walk away without really causing harm to your family and your life. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and it's whether or not you're looking at a city manager role or a private sector, it all looks dreamy, right? It all looks dreamy. But really doing the homework and really looking at all the different elements in either case, in any role, that you're looking at taking in local government or on the private sector side, and trying to get as much of that information as possible before diving in is going to be what's so important.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Let's talk for a minute, Jacob, about what that transition process looks like, what a successful pivot looks like from local government to private consulting. I mean, I'm sure there's a learning curve, which can be pretty steep for people, especially who've been in the public sector their whole careers, and maybe some of their skills translate well and maybe some not as well. But what does that transition look like?
I love it. So I think in conversations I used to be in the public sector, I spent a lot of years with police chiefs and fire chiefs, working in police department and in fire department as member of command staff, civilian member of the command staff, in both fire and police. And I think there's this notion, and even in the city manager world, that hey, we've reached this pinnacle of our career, we've got this title, and these private sector companies are going to pay us millions of dollars for our title and our headshot. And maybe that was true, Chris. I don't know. Maybe that was true. You might know better 20, 30 years ago. But today, to transition over into a private sector consulting firm, I don't know a single firm out there that's not going to want you to do work and make impact and deliver and perform. And so I think, first of all, it's about really understanding that whether you're transitioning mid-career or as a retired annuitant, retiree, you're going to have to work in the private sector. And it might be really hard work and a lot of work.
That doesn't sound fair, Jacob. That just doesn't sound right.
I know, right? I just wanted to get paid for my title. Aren't you going to just have me on there because, I'm a public works director. I have 30 years public works. That's great. When you're in the private sector, we have to figure out how to use that to help our clients and make impact on our cities, because nobody's going to pay us just to congratulate you for your title, right? What they're going to pay you for is to help them solve their problems. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, Chris, that we spend a lot of time with our team members helping them understand the role of a consultant, and that it's no longer about telling war stories. Chris, you're a city manager, you hire consultants. You really don't want to pay $10,000 for someone to come and sit at your desk and just tell you war stories about their career.
Yeah.
So the first thing we tell our consultant team members is, when you're making the shift, you're not being paid for war stories. The second thing is, you have to turn to a position of curiosity. Your job now is to ask a lot of questions. The third thing is, you're no longer in charge. You may have been a city manager for 15 years. You may have been a fire chief for 10 years, a police chief for 5 years, and you were in charge. When you become a consultant, you lose all of that.
That's probably a tough one for a lot of people.
It is. Chris, I cannot tell you how hard it is for most of my team members coming in from the public sector, especially retired annuitants, that have spent a long time being at the top. And now all of a sudden, wait, what do you mean? I'm working for the city of XYZ, and they're not going to listen what I just told them they have to do? No, that's not your job. Your job is to help them and ask really good questions and help solve their problems. And so we spend a lot of time in orientation and onboarding to help with that shift. The next thing is that, thinking about in the transition, the job of a let's just stick with city manager. Job as city manager, you may have been in for the last 7 years, is very well defined. You're going to have to learn new things about what the job of a consultant is. It looks very different day to day. And words like account management, right? Like, what is that? And words like, follow-up and surveys and making sure that our clients are getting the highest level service. All these things we didn't really have to do in the public sector. Mm-hmm. Now we have to sort of re-understand that transition. So our most successful team members that have the fastest transition, they come in with curiosity. They come to JGA and they say, you know what, just because I spent 35 years in the public sector doesn't mean I actually understand fully the private sector. I'm here to learn. And I find those folks on our team, they get up to speed fast because they're willing to be curious, they're willing to learn, and really help our clients make impact. Moment for a quick story about what I think makes a good consultant.
Yeah.
Chris. So I got hired at the fire department. I spent 11 years with the city of Ontario. My first job there was disaster analyst. And I was a disaster analyst. And then I became emergency manager and public information officer and grants administrator, and then on the command staff there. And my very first fire to go out as a public information officer, there was a lack of overhead staff on this big commercial fire. And the chief turns to me and he's like, well, we've already sent all the interns out. We've already sent the custodial staff out to the fire. Like, you're the last guy left. Like, what can you do here? Like, could you talk to the media? Like, and I'm like, Chief, I haven't had any training. Like, I don't know. Like, you talked to me about this PIO thing, but I've never done anything real. And he's like, go, just drive out there and just figure it out. All right, sure. So I got out there, got on scene, attacked by the media and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do and answering questions. And I was a total disaster, Chris, right? But that's how you learn. You get thrown in the fire. And I came back and I went to my desk. I got to write a press release. That's what a PIO does. And so I typed this press release and I printed it out and I brought it to the fire chief and I was so proud. It said the firefighters ran into the burning building and they saved the cat and they rescued the entire neighborhood from destruction and everybody was happy and giving high fives and they saved the world and it was amazing and we're an incredible fire department and aren't we great? Amazing. Here's the press release. I got my MPA just now and I'm amazing and I know how to write and it's just wonderful, right? Here you go, fire chief. Here you go, boss. He looks at it, he reads it, he grabs the thickest red pen. I've never seen a red pen as thick as the one that he was able to find. I have no idea where this thing comes from. I still to this day have never seen a pen so thick, this red pen, and he puts a huge X on that press release.
Ouch.
And he said, successful, not famous. Go rewrite it.
Wow.
Successful, not famous. And if you want to be a good consultant, you will help your client be successful and you will help your client shine, get all the credit, the accolades. You'll take the missiles when things don't go right. That's your job as a consultant. You take heat from your client. We love doing that. And you'll help your client be the star, solve their problems. So 100% of your focus as a consultant over in the private sector has got to be on others. And if you can't put that ego aside, if you can't embrace successful, not famous, it's probably not the best transition for you.
So earlier you mentioned that you're now getting, multiple calls a week from people in the public sector looking to explore transitioning to the private sector because they're just have become miserable in the public sector profession.
Yeah.
So they're seeking a different quality of life. And still want fulfillment. What has your experience been with people who have come from the public sector once they're on the other side? Are you do people for the most part seem to be finding that happiness they're looking for post transition? Taking into account again, okay, they're looking for flexibility, maybe more family time, reduced stress, and just kind of escaping the toxicity of public service. Do people seem to be? Does it seem to be what people thought it would be on the other side?
You mentioned something that I think is worth pointing out first, which is a lot of public sector folks think work-life balance. I will go to the private sector to achieve work-life balance. And I'm not sure how to exactly do that or create that. When we have a city manager that has a council meeting on Tuesday night, I'm going to do absolutely everything to make sure that agenda item for that city manager is delivered. And if it needs to change 10 times because the council changed things before Tuesday night and we got to be there, our team needs to be there, we're going to be there.
Yeah.
And, that's because otherwise clients aren't going to be interested in working with our team. Our motto is your first call. We want to be your first call. And that work-life balance is sort of an interesting thing. Now, I probably shouldn't say this on a podcast, but, I don't call my people after 5 p.m. I don't call them on the weekends. I'm probably going to be, and you can certainly contact all of our team members for that. But do I have to worry about them wanting to deliver something on an evening or a weekend that a client needs and has to be delivered? No. But I do believe very strongly that, people need to be respected. Their time needs to be respected. We respect each other. We work on that. We do have more flexibility, like you pointed out so accurately, in our company, in the private sector, in this environment. We can create the kind of environment and culture that we want. We're not restricted by a lot of things that the public sector has to work in. But does that exactly equate to this vision and dream of, what it looks like on the private sector work-life balance? I'm not so sure. I would say that 95% of folks that come over, at least into our team and our company, are very surprised that things are very different than what they dreamed and imagined it would be. And it mostly, Chris, is around, here's the number one thing. The number one thing is, whoa, wait a minute. I've got to write part of that strategic plan for the police department. Like, whoa, wait, like, write? I haven't written in it's been 9 years. Like, I don't I have people to do that for me? Well, yeah, we have a team, but we have a line in our company. We all scrub toilets. We all scrub toilets. Everybody in my company embraces we all scrub toilets, which means we're a team, and whatever it is our client needs, we're going to do. And we don't have this. Well, I'm the city manager, so I don't have to. We all have to just get the job done for our clients, and we all rally together when it's necessary and deliver. And so I think some of those things can be quite surprising for people making the transition over from the private sector. But we've learned.
I have some advice for your employees, Jacob, who are feeling frustrated that they have to actually write. They should go to YouTube, pull up Gov360. A couple episodes ago, we had one on AI and local government. AI can do a lot of their writing for them.
This is a pretty exciting part for us. We've been doing these AI lectures lately. I just gave one to the Orange County City Engineers Association, and another city brought us in to do AI training for them. And only because a few years ago, we became an early adopter of AI as a company, because, one of our core values is innovation. And so we wanted to see what this new thing was. And you're right. It has made our private sector world better. It's made our public sector world better. However, in no way, shape, or form does it replace the need and the value of people that you can call when you need help and when you need to navigate with something. And so, we believe that people consulting firm is still very, very viable and important, even in the world of AI. Certainly helps make us write some fancier product.
Right. I love the quote, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI.
That's right.
It's not going to replace the human element.
That's right.
That's always going to be necessary.
That's exactly right. Yep, 100%.
So, Jacob, I'd like to get from you some advice for those considering to make this jump. And I mean, really some nuts and bolts steps. If someone's listening or watching this podcast and they're thinking, I really want to, I want to do this. I want to make this switch from public to private sector. What are some very specific steps that you would advise someone to take if they're at that point?
Yeah. So I was, thinking about this in advance of this podcast. What are those nuts and bolts of advice? So first, what I hear often is someone has a role in the public sector, but they really like yoga. Okay. So they're a management analyst and they really like yoga. And what they want to do is quit their management analyst job and just become a full-time yoga teacher. And that's incredible. And then I came across this book. So it's called Quitter. And I got this book when I was a deputy city manager because all I wanted to do was be a keynote speaker. And I was keynote speaking, I was traveling, and I was, professionally represented, and it was great. And I was a full-time government worker. I just wanted to quit that, and I wanted to go do that thing. And this book completely changed the way that I viewed my government job. It filled my tank. It made me appreciate that my government job was financially fueling my ability to be a keynote speaker, or financially fueling that hobby, or that outside hustle, or that passion. So the first step is, if you're thinking about leaving the public sector because you want to pursue a passion or an interest, pick up this book, Quitter, and think about how you can use your day job to fuel your passion and your interest. Because maybe quitting your day job tomorrow is actually going to put more stress into your life and put you in a position that you never even thought could be a danger to your mental and physical health as a result. Okay. Now, if you are in a different situation where it's, hey, I'm considering leaving the public sector altogether for the reasons, Chris, that you outlined, I think there is a difference between someone that's going to leave, mid-career without the safety and security of a more developed pension, or if you're a retired annuitant. But either way, I'll give a few pieces of advice. First of all, and I ask every person that calls in, what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? Mm-hmm. What is it that gets you really fired up? What do you love about your current job? And so, for example, I'll ask that question and someone will say, what I love doing is mentoring. I love coaching. I love helping the entry-level analyst, the management assistant. I love helping those folks grow and develop. And so then I'll say, okay, have you ever thought about exploring professional executive coaching? So we have an executive coaching division in our company. It's one of our divisions. So we'll explore that. No, what's coaching? Is that like mentoring? No, it's not. Here's all the different certifications, and here's all the different, here's what executive coaching is. Now, not every private sector company is going to offer those things that really get you excited. You will be successful in the private sector if you are doing the things that you love and that you enjoy. Mm-hmm. So the dream of, I just want to be in the private sector, I don't think that can make you happy. The dream of doing what I love and enjoy in the private sector with the next thing, which is my next piece of advice, is really focus on the culture and the environment of the company. Mm. The culture and the environment of the private sector company will make or break your experience. We get a lot of folks that come from other private companies where the entire focus was on their quota. And you know how that, Chris, you know exactly how that works. Everything was about the money. For us, what we say is, if you take care of the client and the client loves their experience working with Jacob Green & Associates, JGA, everything else will take care of itself. I don't want you to have to nickel and dime. We don't even do time and materials contracts for that reason. We do fixed fee. We don't want to have to worry. I want my people to work 1,000 hours and not have the client have to worry about, oh my gosh, they're working more on the report. I'll have to pay them more. No, it's fixed fee environments, right? So doing some due diligence on what is the structure? How is success going to be measured in the private sector? So if you get an interview in the private sector, how are you going to measure if I'm being successful? When I'm asked that question, Chris, it's very simple. How happy is the client with your delivery? That's how I'm going to measure your success. How much of a positive impact are you making on the client? Because, Chris, I know that everything else, the reason we have so much repeat business from our clients is because our focus is we have to satisfy our clients and make positive impact. Okay? Yeah. So that's a little bit about how is my success going to be measured. The third thing is, what are the corporate values? Do they have corporate values? What are the things that they embrace in the industry that I love? How do they view the industry that I love? I'll give you an example. If you are someone that loves innovation, which we just talked about with AI, you're going to love working in JGA because we are always going after new innovative products. For example, we do strategic planning. We just did a partnership with Invisio, one of the most innovative strategic planning platforms that's out there. Why we do the partnership? Because we want to pursue innovation, right? If you don't like innovation, or if you like innovation, you want to make sure you're going towards a firm that wants to try out new tools and new resources. So see about that, that values alignment and what that looks like. And finally is going to be, understanding the financial elements of the contract. Because in the public sector, I can only speak for myself, Chris, but I did not understand how private sector compensation worked. It's really foreign when I'm like, what do you mean bonuses?
Right.
Performance bonus, retention bonus, revenue sharing. What are all these kinds of different ways that you can earn an income in the private sector? Kind of excited me, right? And you can sometimes have really good discussions in the hiring. So really it's about learning what the different kinds of compensations look like. Unfortunately, Chris, what I see too often from public sector folks is they call me up, hey, I just had an interview with XYZ company and they only want to pay me $80,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, well, what was the bonus structure? Well, I don't know. I didn't ask those questions. I just saw the advertisement. It said 80,000 plus bonus, but my COLA is 3%. I go, dude, you've got to follow. Your bonus may be X number of dollars that really puts you in a better financial place for you and your family. So really exploring those differences and trying to learn as much as you can and talk to people who have been there and done that. When I get phone calls, I say, hey, talk to Dave in my company. Hey, talk to Tim in my company. Hey, talk to Catherine in my company. Talk to the people who have been in those transition situations so you can learn the pros and cons. There really are pros and cons.
Yeah. Well, another thing that people can do is they can pick up your book. I have a copy right here. This is an Amazon bestseller here titled See Change Clearly, Leveraging Adversity to Sharpen Your Vision and Build Resilient Teams. Jacob, one of the things that really jumped out at me here is the story you tell about the traumatic brain injury you had when you were in college. And then you went through a period of, I think it was 3 years in rehabilitation, and how you applied the lessons from that experience to what you term brain school, right? To leadership in high pressure work environments. Maybe talk about that for a minute, because that really stuck with me.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate you bringing that up, and I appreciate that you model that, as well yourself. That you're not afraid to talk about the challenges and the difficulties. It's how we learn from each other. It's actually what connects us, right? Sometimes in public sector or any environment, we can be so, we want to create a certain image and a certain persona. But actually, everybody is carrying around challenges and everybody has insecurities and everybody has been through some loss or trauma or challenge or issues. It's what bonds us, right? It's what we can learn from. It's what we have in common. When we're so desperate for commonalities these days, that's actually what makes it in common. And so for me, it was, I went off to UC Berkeley. I was a freshman, my second semester. I interrupted a robbery, got smashed on the head, and had a traumatic brain injury and had to drop out of college and do 2.5 years of full-time rehabilitation and many years of outpatient part-time rehabilitation after that. And so, I went to brain school for 2.5 years, and I learned so much that's applicable to this life and this world of transitions, because I had to make an immediate transition in that brain injury scenario. And that really helped me out later in life. So, first of all, I learned that just that fragility of life that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And we never really know what's going to happen. And we have this great gift of being able to work. Like Chris, I literally sat in my little bed next to brain injury school. It was a Murphy bed. I literally sat on this little bed and I just had one wish, like someday I want to work, because I couldn't work. I couldn't hold a job. And someday I want to create some meaning out of this crazy journey that I had been placed on. Yeah. And so we have this great gift to be able to work, especially in our industry, be it the public sector or private sector, where we get to impact, as Greg says, the arc of communities forever, as Greg Devereaux says, right? We get to impact the arc of the communities that we work in forever.
Very meaningful.
And whether or not you're in the public sector or private sector, you get to be a part of that. And so why spend that miserable, right? Why spend that gift or waste that gift of the opportunity and the physical and mental ability to be able to work and make impact and impact communities? And so whether or not it's in the public sector or private sector, don't stay in a position where your values are compromised or where you're so depleted that you're not enjoying and recognizing the ability to make impact. That's the first thing. The second thing that applies from brain injury into this trying to decide whether or not to go private sector or not is in brain injury school, you learn really quickly that you have to lean on the experts in order to get better. A lot of the time in brain injury is spent helping the brain injury patient with self-awareness and just getting to the point where the brain injury patient realizes, wow, I guess I do have a deficit in that area. Help me. And so I've never run into, Chris, anyone that rejects someone reaching out for some help or for some guidance. And so I would encourage anyone that finds herself in a position of trying to figure this out, don't do it alone. I share a story with many folks that when I would go to ICMA conferences every year, I went kind of early as an analyst and as a mid-manager because I wanted to learn, and I felt really isolated. I didn't know anybody, and it was very, it was hard to navigate those conferences. And I always felt like this small, total imposter syndrome. I wrote emails to city managers that I thought were coming to the conference because and I would say, can I take you out for a 15-minute coffee? Chris, years of doing that, no city manager ever said no. And it wasn't the sessions and it wasn't the wine networking events that I still don't even know how to figure out how to do those. It wasn't those things where I learned how to navigate my journey. It was those coffees. And by the way, none of them ended up being 15 minutes. They all ended up being an hour. It's because I just humbled down and wrote an email because I learned it in brain injury school that when you ask people for some guidance and for some help, people generally like to help others.
Yeah.
And they all said yes. And so the same is true here. Reach out and lean on and explore from others what their journey has been. All of my contact information is available. I am very easy to find on LinkedIn. Chris, I know you are super accessible and you are an incredible mentor and guide for so many, including myself in this industry. So I think the beautiful thing about our business is people like helping others.
Yes.
And so brain injury school taught me it's simple, it's easy, it's generally free, and lean on others for help in making this very significant, these life decisions about how to navigate and how to figure out your next step in the journey successfully, whether that be in the public sector or over to the private sector.
Well, I really appreciated you sharing your story, and I hope people will pick up the book. I found it very valuable. I think it offers some real practical tools and tactics to stay focused during crises like rapid growth or budget cuts or personnel issues. But it was fascinating to me because it really kind of it bridges neuroscience with change management and team resilience.
Yes.
So I found that very interesting.
The only thing I can promise about it, Chris, is either it'll help you fall asleep at night, but you won't read the book and say, oh yeah, I've read this thing 20 times before, right? Everybody that reads it, the one thing I say is, well, that's a different approach to the public sector. And that's really a unique approach to change management and life transition. And so that's what I tried to create, is something different and unique based on my personal experiences and how they apply to these kinds of questions.
Well, I appreciate you putting yourself out there too as someone that people can reach out to and lean on for advice and mentorship. That's so important in our profession. And you're right. I have found that the city manager community is so warm and welcoming and always willing to be helpful. I've never reached out to a fellow city manager and asked for help and been turned away. Right. And it's just a very supportive group. We're all in this together. It's important that we help each other out and kind of form this camaraderie within the profession. So, thank you for what you do that way. That was really appreciated. And thank you for sharing your insights and experience. It's certainly a timely and an important conversation, one that reflects both the challenges and I think resilience of our profession, and one that many in the public sector are really grappling with right now.
Absolutely, Chris. The fact that you created this topic, this space to have this conversation, I think this is going to be more and more discussed at the conferences and the events. It's certainly already the key topic and discussion offline, but I think having public conversations about this so we can explore it together and learn together from others' journeys is really important. And I thank you for bringing this to the forefront and allowing an environment for folks to safely explore it and listen and hear and learn. I think you're doing a great service. So thanks for what you're putting together.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are watching and listening, if you are contemplating your own next chapter, Jacob is someone you can definitely learn from and potentially work with. You can find him on LinkedIn or visit jacobgreenandassociates.com for more information. Also, you can pick up a copy of his book, See Change Clearly, on Amazon. We'll put that link in the show notes and the YouTube description. And be sure to share this episode with your colleagues, especially those who are thinking about what comes next in their local government journey. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major podcast platforms. Subscribe to YouTube to watch the video version of Gov360, and subscribe to the Gov360 newsletter on LinkedIn. It's free, and LinkedIn is a great way for us to connect and to continue the conversation. That's a wrap for today. Thank you for joining us on Gov360. Until next time, govern boldly, my friends.